couldn't use your mobile device without touch. Or if you couldn't see what's going on the screen. For me, a couple of years ago, I would have thought that that's the end of the world and there is no other ways of interacting with mobile devices, that it would mean that I would be cut out completely from all these apps and services that I was using on my mobile phone. But today I know that there are actually multiple ways of interacting with mobile devices. So it wouldn't be the end of the world. And because there are so many ways of interacting with mobile devices, we as developers, we need to think about those ways and we need to develop apps that work for other input methods than, for example, touch, which is the most used one for example, mobile phones. So today we are talking about different ways of using mobile devices or interacting with them. And we are also going to talk about what does this mean for a developer. So, a couple of practicalities before we start. If you'd like to follow along with the slides, you can find them from eevis.codes/talks/can-touch-this. They're not really the slides you can see on the presentation, but they are a textual version of them. So you will get the same information, but not the same visuals, basically. So eevis.codes, so eevis.codes/talks, TALKS/cant, CANT-TOUCH-THIS. So yeah, spelling is kind of hard thing, especially for a non-native speaker. But yeah, you can find the slides from there. All right. And another thing before we actually get to the topic, a couple of words about myself. So I'm Eeva-Jonna, or Eevis is the name that I actually recognize better, but my official name is Eeva-Jonna. And I'm accessibility specialist and senior software developer. And I come from Finland. And I work currently at Aura, so yes, the ring company. And my background is in web development, but I have a history with React Native. I have this habit of getting back to it once in a while. So I want to learn what's new in it and try these new things. So not just web developer. And when I'm not coding, I love to explore the nature around here in Finland, because it's just so beautiful. I do that hiking and also kayaking, so I get to see more, I could say. And I'm a disabled person, but my main way of using mobile device, as you may have guessed from the intro, is by touch. But I actually have this reduced motion setting on, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that at later point of this talk. So yeah, all right, let's get to the main topic. And let's talk about different ways users can use mobile devices or interact with them. And the different methods we are talking about today are screen reader, physical keyboard, switch devices, voice recognition, and also zooming and or screen magnifying. So, what are screen readers? They are software applications that allow users to get feedback from the screen. And this feedback is provided either through speech or braille. And screen readers also make it possible to navigate a bit differently. So they provide more options for navigation, which make it easier for screen reader users to navigate. And most popular screen readers are TalkBack for Android and VoiceOver for iOS devices. And then there are others for desktops as well. But because we are talking about mobile devices here, I'm just going to mention these two. And you might wonder if you've ever heard about text-to-speech. Is this like the same or is there some differences? Well, there are differences. So text-to-speech, it has this similar possibility of listening to text on a screen. So you can select some text and listen to that, but it doesn't provide these navigation options. So it's just for listening text. But screen readers, they provide more navigation options. And who uses screen readers? Well, people who have trouble seeing or understanding the screen. And this can mean, for example, people with visual impairments, and also people with, for example, cognitive disabilities. And one thing I want to mention is dyslexia. So it might be sometimes easier to listen to what's on the screen than read it if you have dyslexia. So yeah, that's it about screen readers. Then there are physical keyboards. And when I talk about physical keyboards, yes, the same device that you are using probably with your computer. And there are people who prefer using physical keyboards instead of, well, touch, for example, or mouse if we were talking about computers. And examples of these types of people can be, for example, many people with motor disabilities, people who have tremors, so their fine motor control is not so precise, so it's easier to hit the enter, for example, instead of trying to hit that small touch target area on the screen when you have tremors. So there are different types of people who use, and some just prefer, some just like using keyboards for navigation. On computers, I use keyboard a lot to navigate because sometimes it's just faster. And these physical keyboards, as I mentioned, can be similar things that you use on your computer. So, well, would look the same. But there are also modified keyboards that might be in different shape or have less or more keys in it, or keyboard mimicking hardware. And now you might be thinking that, okay, so if there is so many different devices, how can we think about all of those? Well, these keyboards or modified keyboards or keyboard mimicking hardware, they are basically working just the same way. So they are responding to the same events. So you have to, you can test these with your own keyboard. You don't have to get these modified keyboards or keyboard mimicking hardware necessarily to test if your app is working with keyboard. So yeah, that's about physical keyboard. Then there are switch devices. And switch devices help people with movement limiting disabilities navigate on the screens where they and also make selections on those screens that would be typically done by touch or keyboard or mouse if on computer. And there are two types of switches. There can be this one switch solution where one switch handles basically everything, navigating, selecting, all the other possible actions. And then there are these switches that have two switches one for navigating and one for selecting and other actions. And switches can be either these so-called traditional switches, so there is large buttons, either one or two in different forms, but also it can be anything from eye tracking, so like one movement, like when you look at left, then you select something, and then when you close, I was supposed to say that when you look left, you are navigating to the next item, and then when you close your eyes, you select. So, or other, facial expressions as well. Then there can be joysticks type of things, or sip and puff devices. So like sip can be one, and then puff can be like another switch, basically. And actually one of the most famous switch device users was actually Stephen Hawking. And he, especially after losing his ability to move, he was using a cheek switch to navigate and use, mobile devices, and also to speak, because he needed that to be able to express himself. So there are multiple implementations of switch devices, but they all work the same way from technical point of view. Then there's voice recognition. And voice recognition is for people who prefer to speak and kind of like command their mobile devices to speech instead of, for example, touching or keyboard or switch device or other ways. And this voice recognition might be already familiar to you, because these voice assistants such as Alexa or Siri are fairly common these days, and people are using voice recognition to communicate with their devices. So there is that. And the last, I wouldn't use input method in this case, but the last thing I'm going to mention here is zooming and screen magnifying. And this consists of multiple possible things that user can do. And one of them is using larger font sizes, so user can switch font sizes to be larger on their operating system settings, and your app should respect that, but also if it respects that, you should check that the layout doesn't break when the font size is increased, and that it's still usable when font size is increased. And another thing is zoom levels. So user might prefer having like larger zoom level on their device, and so that it's not just the text, but everything else is bigger too. And then there is screen magnifying. It's another software, and user can use it to zoom parts of the app so that they can see them better. And people who use these solutions are often people with low vision. Alright, so we've talked about screen readers, physical keyboards, switch devices, voice recognition, and then zooming and screen magnifying. But what does this mean for a developer? Well, this means that you need to think about more than just touch, and you need to really pay attention to these different input methods and test with them. And I have a couple of easy to start with tips how to make your app more accessible for different input methods. All right, let's start with visible focus tiles. So when user navigates with the keyboard, they rely on focus tiles so that the element that's currently focused is highlighted in some way. And why do you have to think about that? Well, first of all, you need to create visible focus tiles. Usually the default focus tiles, they aren't that visible, so I'd suggest creating really like custom focus tiles that are visible enough. And when I say visible enough, I mean that they should have enough color contrast. And sorry, that contrast should be, so the color contrast should be high enough, or the contrast ratio should be high enough. And when I say high enough, it should be compared to high enough compared to the background and also the component it's highlighting, so that it's really visible there. And just want to mention one reason why visible, or like an example where maybe we all understand why these visible focus tiles are important. Because, when navigating with keyboard, and if there is no focus tiles, or like the focus is not visible at all, it would be the same as if you were using your computer with a mouse and the cursor is hidden. There would be really hard times to try to interact with your computer if you couldn't see the mouse cursor. So if you don't have visible focus tiles, it means the same thing. User can't really use your app. Right. The second tip is to annotate headings. And one reason for this is that users who use, for example, screen readers, they one way of navigating is by headings, so that they can find fast the important part if it has heading and it's correctly annotated. And in the world of web, it's sort of easier and clearer because there you have these H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tags which are used to annotate headings. But in the mobile world, it's not that clear because there are no such elements. So usually headings are created with like text views or like text components. And of course, it's important to have like heading styles that communicate for a sighted person that, okay, this one is heading, so it's clear, but it's also important to annotate it programmatically. And you can do this via accessibility role. So here I have an example of a text component that has text for custom header. And I've omitted all the other properties, but here is a property accessibility role which is set to header. So this way you can annotate headers so that assistive technology knows that this one is indeed a header or heading. All right. The next tip is to add name, role, and status if needed for custom elements. Of course, I want to say that when you are creating user interfaces, stick with the semantic elements. So if you are creating, for example, a button, use that button element because it already has so much accessibility baked in, and you don't have to do so many things to make that button accessible for users, or other semantic elements for that matter. But sometimes you really need to create custom elements. And when you do, remember to add name, role, and state if it's needed for that element. I have an example here, and it's basically a custom button. I still want to emphasize that used the button element, but still, like, I wanted to take this one because it's maybe the easiest one to demonstrate. So that's why I'm still kind of creating this button. So this is just an example. Don't do this use button element, but let's use it as an example. So here I have a touchable opacity, which has a text element inside it. And the text element has text to display, which is name. So that's the name, basically what I'm saying, that add name. And when I'm talking about name, I mean that it's the label for the element, basically. So that's what assistive technology users hear, for example, when they are navigating. So that, like, there is some clear name that they know that, okay, here is this text to display in this case. Then there is again this accessibility role, which is set to button. So that's also an important one. Remember to set the role. And then in this case, let's imagine that this button or custom button should be disabled at some point. And I've set accessibility state and its disabled attribute to false. And it would be true in some cases. But it's just to demonstrate. So this one's example of setting the stage. There are other stages or states there. So disabled is just one example. So for example, is expanded if building something that could be expanded. So some accordion type of thing, you might need this is expanded state and so forth. Right. And then the last of these tips is to respect reduced motion. And now I'm coming to, because at the beginning I mentioned about reduced motion and I use it, now I'm coming to it. So there are people, users, who don't want to see animations on their apps or want to see reduced animation on their apps. Reasons for this might be anything from getting distracted because of animations to having symptoms triggered by these animations. And these symptoms can be anything from nausea to dizziness or other not so pleasant things. And these people have the option to turn reduced motion on the operating system level settings. And when we are building apps, we should respect that setting so that when these people use these apps and they don't really want these, let's say, fast loading screen animations, that's something I've seen out there, then they can opt out from those. And from technical point of view, we can find out if user has this setting on via accessibility info APIs method is reduced motion enabled. So if it returns true, then it's enabled, and you should think about the animations and not show either not show them at all or show a reduced version of them. And if it's not enabled, then maybe you can have these animations, though I would advocate for not having too many of them. But that's completely a different talk and different topic, so not going into there right now. All right. And I have a couple of more tips here or like more general advice when it comes to accessibility and like building apps that work for different input methods. So first of all, no semantics. I already touched this in the previous slides. but really learn about semantics and use them. So that's the first thing. Then learn more about different technologies related to accessibility, because as I said, my goal wasn't to go over every piece of information there is about these things. So I would say that learn more. Make the effort to learn more. And of course, test with different input methods. So not just with touch, but remember to test with screen readers and keyboards and switch devices. And just in general, learn more about accessibility. So that's I think it's a good advice to any developer who works with user interfaces, because when we create accessible apps or sites or basically whatever, they are better for every user. So there's that. Learn more about accessibility in general. And as I mentioned somewhere in the beginning, my goal is to kind of provide a starting point I'm not going to talk about every single detail there is to know about this, because I just don't have enough time. And I also know that there has been lots of information still. So I just want to share the key takeaways I really hope that you remember from this talk. And I also hope that this talk has provided you some vocabulary and kind of starting points to start learning more about these concepts and things. Because sometimes, starting to learn about something, it's really hard if you just don't know even the vocabulary or what you should search or anything. So I hope that this has provided that. So what I hope that you remember from this talk. First of all, users use mobile devices differently. Not everybody uses touch to interact with your app. Remember to test with different input methods. This is really something that I really hope that you remember from this talk. And educate yourself. So learn more about these themes, learn more about accessibility, learn more about how people with disabilities use their mobile devices. All right. So thank you for listening. My name is Eeva-Jonna Panula, and you can find me from Twitter. I'm Eevis Panula, so Eevis Panula. And you can find all the other information or contact information from my website, which is eevis.coach, so eevis.codes. And you can also see them at the bottom of the slides. So, thank you.